Yep, there we go. And I will give it right back over to you. There we go. All
Okie
right.
doke.
Yep. And so we are very honored to have a birder the caliber of Laura with us tonight. She's an ornithologist and author. I was checking out her website. She's got a dozen books out there, numerous awards. I'm going, wow. And so her website is lauraerickson.com. Laura, you're welcome to talk about any of your books, anything that's on your website, anything else you'd like to share or promote. You're welcome to do. And thank you for being here. And I will hand it over to you so you can start your presentation.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen so you can all see my my slides. Okay, and I was asked to talk about the love lives of birds. This is my newest book, but this book is all kind of fanciful. It's all based on reality, but I'm also going to be basing it on another book I wrote. This is the year of the pileated woodpecker, according to the American Bird Conservancy. And I don't mention them in my book, but it's a bird I love very much because it posed for me once to get that tongue shot. And that one on the tree with my son was from back when I was a bird rehabber and took care of him. He crashed into a car on probably his maiden voyage. And so he needed to be um, taken care of because he had a sprained wing, and that meant he couldn't be with his parents. So I had to kind of teach him how to be wild. But he was great fun, and he liked to sit on my shoulder with his beak right by my ear, and he would stick that long slurpy tongue. That was not him, the bird showing his tongue, but he would stick his tongue into my ear and trace all the folds. And so I don't know if you guys will appreciate this, but you are listening tonight to probably the only person on the planet who's been French kissed in the ear by a pileated woodpecker. So unless you say pileated, that's fine too, because they're both acceptable pronunciations. Just don't call them a pleated woodpecker. Those are found in the same fabric stores with ruffled grouse. But the other book, I'm going to be bringing pictures from into this presentation, is one that I did with, I was the writer and Mari Reed was the photo editor, except this book, Into the Nest, was so heavy on really good photos that I insisted that she be made the co-author. If you see a picture of the book in the corner, that'll be a photograph I did not take. That'll be one from the book, and I give the photo credits of the person who did it, but the rest of the photos are mine. And then the little illustrations, like the two on this, are from my newer book, The Love Lives of Birds. Now, everybody knows somebody who's been divorced, somebody who's been married for 50 years or more, somebody who has had multiple divorces, somebody who's had multiple relations without ever getting married. People have a whole lot of mating systems, not just within populations, different societies, but also different individuals in the same society. Birds tend to be very strict about their mating systems within a species. We're one species who has lots of mating systems. Different bird species usually have only one. There's advantages to forming a pair bond. If you find a mate, then you don't have to worry about courting anymore and finding a mate. You can focus all your energy during the breeding season on egg production and raising your babies. You can share the jobs of raising your babies. Some birds split it perfectly evenly, where both parents are bringing food, both parents share incubating and all that. Some species, one parent does some of it, one parent does the other, and some responsibilities are shared, but nothing is all one bird's job anymore. When you have a co-parent, you get to have influence on how well your babies survive. And if something bad happens to you, some of those babies may still survive. So there are big advantages to forming a pair bond, but a pair bond can be very short or it can be very long. And there is only one advantage to a lifelong pair bond, where the birds absolutely mate till life, till death they do part. And that is that they never ever have to go and find a new mate until something bad happens to their mate. They can just have this nice sustained relationship without worrying about it. There's also advantages to not forming a pair bond. Sustaining the pair bond takes time and energy and trust. You have to get a mate who you can trust is going to do all the things they need to do in raising your babies. You don't have, if you don't have a pair bond, you don't need to deal with trusting anybody, and you don't have to stick with one bird for long. You can be free as a bird. Whether you're a male or a female, if someone better turns up, you could take advantage of hookups. If you're a successful female, you could attract several males to be fathers of your babies, so your babies will have more genetic diversity. If you're a successful male, you could mate with a lot of females and be the father of way more babies in a single season than you could if you were committed to one female, because there's a limit to how many eggs each individual female can lay. If you're the bird taking care of young, and in some birds like shorebirds, that's the male, and in most birds, it's the female. But if you're the one taking care of the babies and something bad happens to the other parent, it doesn't matter because you're the one taking care of the babies. Um, and if you're the bird not taking care of babies and something happens to the birds who are taking care of babies, you haven't put all your eggs in one basket. If you're uh, uh, a male of a lot of kinds of birds, or a female phalarope, you'll have eggs in more than one nest. And so if something bad happens to one of the birds taking care of babies, well, you still have those other nests that could succeed. So genetically, there's advantages either way. So different birds have come up with different systems. Some are absolutely not the marrying kind. They don't sustain pair bonds for any length of time. Now, mallards, you see male and female mallards paired off. The word mallard comes from Old French. M-A-L-L is from male or masculine, and the ARD is pejorative, like drunkard or sluggard, because mallards epitomize the worst of masculinity. That is how they got their names. The males will mate with anything that will hold still long enough to let them. And what females do, they choose which male they want when all the males are terribly hormonal during the winter time. The female will pick the one who seems so focused on her that he'll protect her from all the other males. The problem is that males cannot help themselves. They may be perfectly content with one female, but then they eye the chick next door and they go visit her temporarily. While he's gone visiting her, another male visits his mate, and you end up something like 68% of mallard broods in wild areas, not just concentrated urban areas, but in wild areas, 68% of mallard broods have more than one father among the baby ducks. because even though they've sort of paired off, she's only picked him for defense, and he's only going to stay with her during the time that he can still be the father of more eggs. As soon as she starts brooding, he totally loses interest and goes off and joins those other males and watches the football draft stuff. Um, that's what mallards do. Uh, Males usually outnumber the females, and they just do all kinds of wacky, crazy things. They're as much showing off to other males as to the females. But the female who chooses one mate is the one who gets to call the shots. We might have a female mallard from Wyalusing State Park who hooks up with a male from Connecticut when they're down in Louisiana for the winter. He will follow her back up to Wyalusing State Park. Males follow the females to where the females came from. Over the world, mallards are found naturally on every continent except I don't think they're naturally found on Australia, and they're not in Antarctica. But over the world, they all look the same. And domesticated mallards, the ones that were taken into captivity long ago and mate so easily that they raise babies easily in captivity. So Pekin ducks are true mallards genetically, and they tend to raise domesticated birds to have white feathers and white skin because the actual pigments in the feathers and in the skin make them stronger. And so if they're weaker, they're easier to pluck when you're going to eat it. And so that's why we have so many white domesticated geese and ducks. But those white domesticated ducks are mallards, and if they escape the wild, the domesticity, it doesn't take many generations for them to look like pure mallards again. The one way you can tell if a mallard has some domesticated blood, and a lot of urban mallards do, is they tend to have a wider white ring around the neck on the males. But yeah, the males are just all crazy, and they will mate with anything. When this is a common eider in the middle that was up in Superior, Wisconsin a couple of years ago, and boy, the mallards wanted her. They don't care. That there are hybrids between mallards and I think every other North American duck. The hybrids are usually not capable of breeding, especially when you go across genera and stuff. But yeah, they hybridize with everybody. And but when the male gets the female, they mate in the water. And all these cool photos of their courting and this are from the Into the Nest book. Mari Reed took a lot of these. And then they seem so contented together, but only until she's done laying eggs. As soon as she's done, he's off. She's got all the duty of raising the babies. You may see mallards swimming together, male and female, but virtually never once the babies hatch. It's just mom with the baby duty then. And she's a very devoted mother, but she does it all herself. The babies grow up and they turn out, the boys, just like their dad. It's the way it works for mallards. Some birds are into speed dating. They will just very quickly make a choice, and whatever happens, happens. Prairie chickens are one of the birds that the males join together in what's called a lek, and the females will come. Each female will choose the male who seems best to her. And there's a pretty general consensus about which male is, quote, the best. So most of the nests of females in an area of prairie chickens, most of the eggs will have had one father. for all those nests. But the second guy may get some success, but the males seem more focused on each other than on the females. They're like competing, and there seems to be some pleasure in the whole thing, and they go on way after all the females have laid eggs. And that sounds stupid because there's hawks. Males have way higher mortality than females because they're out dancing right in, where the hawks are flying over. But the reason they keep doing it for so long is that if a fox comes and steals all the eggs in one nest, she's going to go back to the lac and try and find a new, mate again. And so the males who stick it out will get to father subsequent broods. And so they're always hoping that they'll end up the winner, but they don't seem too depressed if they don't get the girl. But they're just so cool. They just will sit, and all of a sudden they'll be like staring at each other, and something will just arouse them, and they'll suddenly start dancing. And it's one of my favorite things to watch. And those air sacs, that's just bare skin. And when they're relaxed, they lower those feathers on their head and deflate the air sacs on their eyebrows and their throat pouches. But they're pretty cool. And the females just come, choose a mate, go off and lay an egg. And the females tend to come back day after day, and until they have their whole clutch. But I like that the one that chased the other one off is littler. But that works for prairie chickens. That's called the Lek system. Some birds have exclusive boys and girls clubs like turkeys. That's the only example I can think of where males hang out with males all year and females hang out with females. And then the females come and choose a guy during the breeding season. So the males are all displaying with each other. Over the winter time, you'll see flocks. If there's a male in a flock of hen turkeys, it's a young male from that hatched the previous summer, and that bird, when it suddenly thinks, why am I hanging out with all the women, and it'll go off and join the men. But that's just how turkeys are. I remember when WSO, Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, had an annual field trip to Necedah to see a handful of wild turkeys, the only wild turkeys remaining in the state of Wisconsin. That was a long time ago now. That was in the 70s. But they're pretty impressive. And the whole males do not help females raise young. And if anything, males are dangerous for the chicks because they're really, really aggressive. And so that's why this is one of the only birds that they have a hunting season during the nesting season. It doesn't affect the ability of females to get males to mate with and have baby turkeys, but it doesn't hurt the population because the males actually can be aggressive to those little babies. But she lays her eggs, and in a clutch like this, chances are there's 2 or 3 different fathers and one mother. And it's a system that works. Hummingbirds don't have, like turkeys, hummingbirds don't have even a brief pair bond session. These are the Rosie the Riveter birds, I call it. The females do all the work, and the males are off fighting the war. Rosie the Riveter was how what they called it when the women in America had to get jobs as firefighters and in factories and doing all the stuff that the strong men had been doing until they went off to fight World War II. And so now the males are off fighting a war for hummingbirds, and the females are keeping the home fires burning. They're the only ones who make the nest, incubate the eggs, feed the babies. The males enjoy having these brief encounters with the female, but I don't even know if they think about the fact that that is what makes baby hummingbirds. They may have, somebody may need to sit them down and give them the facts of life. They make their nest, this nest, which holds the female very tightly because she's got to use her body heat to heat two tiny eggs, each the size of a pea. And those eggs are going to hatch into chicks. And before the babies leave the nest, those two chicks are each going to be as big as the mother, or a little bit smaller if they're males, because hummingbirds, like hawks, like many hawks and owls, the female is the larger one. But so she has to make her nest to work perfectly as an incubator and a bassinet, but to grow into a crib and then into a big kid bed before the babies fledge. So to do that, she uses spider silk and weaves in little pieces of things, but she doesn't weave anything except spider silk. The only thing she uh, what do you call it? The only thing she weaves are stretchy because the nest has to be able to stretch. So she decorates it with little bits of lichen and moss and little green things to make the nest hide, be more camouflaged. But it's very thick when it needs the most insulation while she's incubating, and then when the babies hatch and they're so very tiny. But then she's feeding them and they're going to grow. And I think I'm going to have a whole series that shows it, but she has to build a new nest for each brood because the nest gets totally misshapen by the time the babies leave. Some females will build their new nest right on top of the old nest, but it always has to be a new nest so it's tight again. And the males have a very important role in the survival of baby hummingbirds. A lot of people don't think how important it is that the males chase everybody away. The one thing a male hummingbird respects is a female because she's bigger and she has these spots on her tail that she flares out, and that tells him, oh, this female, and he backs off, where everybody else he chases away. One time I watched a ruby-throated hummingbird chase away a bald eagle. The hummingbird was sitting on a wire at my mother-in-law's, and I was looking at it through my spotting scope. And all of a sudden, the hummingbird's looking really agitated, looking up in the sky. So I look up, and there's a bald eagle flying. And right at the moment the bald eagle crossed into the defended airspace of this hummingbird, zoom, he took off, starts dive bombing the eagle up, down, on his upper back, and like a little avian yo-yo. And the bald eagle weighs 1,600 times as much as a ruby-throated hummingbird. And I don't even think the eagle noticed the little twerp, but he was flying. So he eventually crossed out of the column of defended airspace, and the hummingbird came back to the exact spot on the wire because it was in my scope again. And now he's puffed up and being so proud because he chased off the bald eagle. But the reason that's an important impulse is he chases things from the flowers, except he doesn't chase the female. So she can be off the nest the minimum amount of time, getting nectar and bugs, and then come back to incubate the eggs so the eggs can develop without her being off them and them getting chilled. So the male chases every competitor from flowers, and that's a very useful thing, including all these hummingbird moths. So the males weren't important in raising the babies except chasing things off. But after the females are done nesting, the males are out of here because they don't need to be around anymore. And if they did stick around, they're eating nectar that the females and babies need. The females have to replenish their bodies. The adult females leave as soon as their bodies are ready, and that leaves all the late summer flowers when we can be having droughts and other things that make food harder to come by. That guarantees that what's left will be there for the baby hummingbirds. So the adult females leave when the young can fend for themselves, and the young leave after their muscles and body fat can power their migration. And it's a system that works. American woodcocks are not lekking birds. You'll hear one woodcock peep, beep, beep, beep. And then all of a sudden, he'll take off. While he's taking off, you suddenly are hearing more male woodcocks beep, beep, beep. But those are not 2 years old. Those are the 1-year-olds who are learning, and they're on his territory. They're territorial. And the females come, and the young guys kind of hope they can, have their way, but the females want the guy who is doing the dancing, and he's doing all his dancing under cover of darkness, like Cyrano de Bergerac. He's long and proboscis and high in secretive romance, and they spend their days just picking at bugs in the mud, especially worms. And their bill, notice that when he sticks the bill in, it's closed. And he pulls something up with a closed bill, and then he opens it to eat it. And that's because the tip of the bill is what they call prehensile. The tip can open without the whole mouth getting full of mud. And then he pulls up the worm and then can eat it, or she. I can't tell if that's male or a female. But they're just beautiful little birds. And he's hard to pick out in the darkness, but if you watch, sometimes you can pick them out. When they fly up, they make their wings make the chittering sound as they rise in the spiral. When they get to the top, they start chirping, and then they drop down like a fallen leaf back to the ground and go beep. But he's irresistible but shy and introverted, and so is Roxanne, the female. So it's very romantic. And this is a female on eggs in a parking lot in Ohio at the McGee Marsh, where they every year have this ginormous birding festival. They call it the biggest festival in North America, the biggest birding festival or something, but the biggest week. But she nests in the parking lot every year, and everybody watches her and takes pictures, and they have her roped off, and she knows nobody will go past the rope, and so it has worked for years. It's really cool. And woodcocks, it works. Then there's the hippie commune birds, the one big happy family red-winged blackbirds. They're hippie communes year round, only there's no sex in the winter. Then they're just all together eating. But and they get these ginormous flocks. Then comes spring and the males get territorial. They start out just in the morning before the females come back. The males go to the marsh. There's no good food in the marsh yet. It's still frozen. So the males each claim their territory, and then they all go back off in their hippie commune to eat in a farm field all afternoon. And then the females come back, and the males have their territory. The females pick which territory they want, and that's the guy they do most of their mating with, but not all. And so one male may have 6 females on his territory, another male may have none, but they may both have babies because she'll go visit that guy too. They just do whatever they feel like, and the males will help raise every baby on his territory. They give a little more work to the first female who showed up, who is sort of like his wife number one. But he helps raise all the babies. It's pretty cool. They work really hard, the females, to make these nests, and they do all the incubating, but then the males do help with feeding the babies, though the females do most of the work. And it's a system that works. A lot of birds have a pair bond, but it's complicated how well that pair bond works and how long it works. I always say black-capped chickadees are living in Jane Austen's world. They started the concept of social distancing. With or without a pandemic, they like to keep a distance from one another. The only time two chickadees sleep in a cavity together are when the female is on her babies, brooding them. And as soon as the babies are big enough that they can keep their body temperature, she goes off and sleeps somewhere else. It can be 60 below in Tower, Minnesota on February 2nd, 19, whatever year it was. And the chickadees each were sleeping in their own quarters all night. They cannot stand the thought of a double bed. They usually build their own nest cavity, though they will use birdhouses. Cornell found that they prefer birdhouses that are filled with wood chips, so they can at least feel like they excavated it. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single chickadee in possession of a good territory must be in want of a mate. That was the first sentence of Pride and Prejudice with a little bit of manipulating. Chickadees lead more provincial lives than did Jane Austen herself. They stay within a neighborhood year after year, associating with a small circle of acquaintances. When the baby chickadees hatch, they each move out to a different territory. So they don't have to keep track of their siblings, and they don't have to worry about choosing a sibling as their mate. They can forget about that. I'll talk a little bit about their brains. They're pretty amazing. Their lives, just chickadees always seem busy, like their lives are nothing but a quick succession of busy nothings. But if you're observant, you notice individuals, their relationships, and the dramas within any chickadee flock. They have a strict, stable social hierarchy. They become marriageable the spring after their first winter. So when they're 1 year old, they can be raising babies. Young chickadees start out at the bottom of the social ladder, rising in rank as they get older. Pairs are composed of birds of equal social standing. So Elizabeth Bennet could have been a chickadee when she noted about Darcy, he is a gentleman, I am a gentleman's daughter, so far we are equal. But the one time they don't just rise is when a male or female near the top loses its mate. The others don't shift up, swapping mates to get to that position. That chickadee will pick somebody at the bottom and bring them up, and then that new chickadee. So it'll be like when if the king or queen of England or the prince waiting in line marries a commoner, now she's got all the standing. That's pretty interesting. Some infidelity occurs in chickadees. If you're looking for the perfect bird to not have any hanky-panky, don't look at chickadees. They have the same kind of sensibility as high school and college girls going to a rock concert and throwing their underpants up on stage. If a guy sings good enough, the female can't help it. She goes to his territory. And like Mrs. Bennet might have noted, I can assure you there is quite as much of that going on with chickadees as with people. Chickadees probably cannot remember which hour or glance or words laid the foundation, but year after year, the same pair ends up until something happens, but with all that hanky panky in between. And the whole point is to produce these little guys. And it's a system that works. Casa Nova means new house in Italian. And house wrens are literal Casanovas. They build new houses hoping the females will come. They sing, and to advertise, they find every crevice on their territory that seems like a female might like it. They're these little, realtors. They stuff it with sticks and they hope that a female will pick one. If a female wanders onto his territory, he shows her all the ones like a realtor showing all the houses that are up for sale. She picks one, and that does not shut him up. He just keeps singing away. He sings while she's incubating the eggs. Then they both feed the babies and take care of them. When they fledge, the babies are right there on his territory, so he keeps feeding them. But meanwhile, the real estate agent in the next territory has also been singing. The mom of this little baby can't help it. She wanders over to the next realtor for her next eggs so she can start laying eggs right away. These guys still need care, and their dad is taking care of them even as he's advertising. And a new female comes in, finds one of his other houses, takes that one over. And so that way, by swapping mates as quickly as the babies fledge for the mothers, they maximize the number of baby house wrens in a whole area. And there's so much mortality that that's why they have to do it that way, to make sure there's enough babies. And the fledglings I watched last summer in my backyard, many of them were taken in the Great Blue Jay Massacre on Fledge Day. The Blue Jays found out where all the babies were and were feeding them to their babies. But it works, but only because they just have to produce so many babies. Bluebirds are like out of a soap opera. There's so much hanky panky going on. If you have, several bluebird houses in an area, you can watch how much drama there is. The males have this cool wing waving thing they do, and females find that irresistible. Isn't that romantic looking? It actually is so photogenic. And the whole point is to raise baby bluebirds. These guys are obviously getting fed at a bluebird feeder because they're feeding mealworms. It's very important, if you're feeding bluebirds mealworms, to make sure they're coated in some sort of calcium, because mealworms, compared to most insect larvae, are calcium deficient, and it's not good for baby bluebirds. So make sure they're not feeding them too many mealworms. Only put them out, once a day. But the male is so happy to attract the female to his house, but he can't help but go visit other females too, and females come visit, and somehow that soap opera system works. American robins sing this old-fashioned song. The one they're singing now is one that robins sang when the Pilgrims came, and they just sing away. The females find that highly irresistible. The more he sings, and he does his most robust singing before light. So if you do a breeding bird survey, you're guaranteed to hear robins on your first stop, but they'll be petering out when it gets light. The reason for that is that they do eat a lot of earthworms, and they can't see them in the dark. They stop singing when there's enough light for them to be able to pig out on earthworms. That's when the males and females have their romantic trysts. Somehow, breakfast, a good earthworm breakfast makes them both kind of randy. So that's when they do their mating, usually, is just in that early morning feed. And then as it grows lighter, after he's eaten enough, he goes back to singing. but his singing is declaring to all the other robins, this is my territory. They're the anti-Woody Guthrie. The words of their song are, this land is my land, this land is my land, this land's not your land, this land is my land, this land was made for me, me, me. And the other robins kind of respect that. When you have a problem with robins or cardinals flying into their reflection in your window, they know this is their territory. They sing, and all of a sudden they spot this other male in the window, and they go back and sing, and nobody's answering. So yeah, they know this is my property. And then they go back, and there's that upstart again. And when he gets agitated and raises his head feathers, so does his reflection. And they don't have the concept of a reflection. So they know it's another bird. He's not acting right. He's not singing. And so he keeps trying to drive him away, and he can't. So the only thing you can do is try to break the reflection by putting something on the glass until he forgets about it. But they do a lot of fighting with real bluebirds, real robins, as well as reflections. And females do it too. They're as territorial as the males, even though they're more quiet about it. And they wait to, when we have a dry spring, they often are paired up, but they cannot start building their nest until we get a rain, because they need mud to build their nest. And then so they really like wet stuff for making their nest. And this is what they do when they're all romantic, and the whole point is to raise these babies. And worms are muddy too, but the babies don't get hurt by eating a little mud. And it's a system that works. Robins will stay with the same mate for the whole season if they're lucky and succeed in raising their broods. If they lose a brood, especially the first brood, they both will go try and find somebody else someplace else. The mockingbird is the Othello bird. He got Desdemona to fall in love with him by telling her stories about all his adventures. And she was so impressed that she fell in love with him. And mockingbirds, when they're imitating every sound they have heard, they're telling about their travels. They're telling about the fact that they encountered a chainsaw and survived. They encountered a cell phone and survived. They encountered a playground where children were screaming and having fun, and they survived. And the females decide which guy is singing the coolest, most varied songs, and that's who wins. And that's what they do. And they will stay together for the whole season, and sometimes year after year. But they do some of that little genetic mixing even within a single brood, because females love a good story. And it works. White-throated sparrows are in a rom-com. And sometimes I compare white-throated sparrows to the four main characters of Gone with the Wind. There's two different colors of white-throated sparrows. There's the white striped and there's the tan striped. Half of all white-throated sparrows have white stripes. Half have tan stripes. Half of all male white-throated sparrows have white stripes and half have tan stripes. Half of all females have white and half of all females have tan. But 98% of all white-throated sparrow nests, pairs, you have one of each. You have a white stripe and a tan stripe. Behaviorally, they are different. The ones with white stripes are Rhett Butler and Scarlett O'Hara. They are both bossy, assertive, in your face, want their own way. The tan stripe are Melanie and Ashley. They're soft, gentle, very nurturing, very parental. Now, in labs, they find that almost all the males fall for scarlet. They all want the white striped female. The trick is if a white striped male pairs with a white striped female, the moment she starts to sing and white striped females all sing, he wants her barefoot in the kitchen. He wants her to shut up and he drives her off his territory. So it doesn't work to have two white stripes. Also, the females in lab studies all fall for Ashley Wilkes. They all want a tan striped female. So there's no way a white striped male can attract a white striped female if she has a tan striped male that she can count on. If two tan striped birds end up together because they're the only ones around, the moment Scarlett O'Hara goes through, Ashley forgets all that honorable stuff and runs off with her. And so Melanie and Rhett end up together, even though neither of them is the other one's first choice, but it still works. And the reason it works for them is because the male is territorial enough and protective enough as far as defense, while she's nurturing enough. You need one that nurtures and one that's territorial. So it's a system that works, but it's pretty strange. Romantic duets, the female cardinals sing in spring, and especially during the nesting part of spring. Being the singers, because in winter they're so conspicuous and they sing away. But the females don't sing out in the open like the males do, but her song is actually more complex than the males. And that's pretty cool. And they're all romantic about talking to each other, singing to each other, and feeding each other. And he feeds her while she's on the nest, and they both feed the babies. And the babies need a lot of food. And the whole point is to raise these adorable little babies, and it's a system that works. Then there's some birds that really are genuinely till death do us part. Trumpeter swans, they can be in a huge collection of swans during the winter, but when they pair and they're with their young from the previous, that they raised the previous year, but as soon as their anniversary comes around, they get all romantic and fly off, and they are very, very territorial. Trying to drive everybody away. They do not like to share. They are so close and synced. And whether they're both white because they don't have a lot of iron in the water, or whether they both look like that because there is a lot of iron in the water, they are very devoted to each other. They will chase off geese and ducks and anybody else who comes anywhere near them. They are violent, and the whole point is to raise these adorable babies. And then they go back to just the two of them the next spring. They stay with the babies and collect with babies from previous years and all their cousins and everybody in the winter, and then break up, and it works. Sex and the City, rock pigeons are so devoted to their mates, and people who talk, we talk about people who are pro-war, wanting to get engaged in a war for whatever reason. We call them hawks. But no hawk has ever helped the military during wartime. The ones that have helped the military during wartime have been the doves. And that's because the doves don't care about the war. They probably hate it as much as the soldiers do. They just want to get back to their home and their mate. And so that devotion is what we capitalize on during, the Army Signal Corps Pigeon Company back during World War I and II. but pigeons are highly romantic. Some of them, nobody's figured out what makes one pigeon fall in love with another. In some areas, they have such varied plumage, and in some places, studies have shown that they tend to choose a mate with similar plumage. But in other places, they've done studies that have proven that they choose a mate that has different plumage. It's really pretty random, but they're very, very romantic, and they love each other no matter what. And they whisper sweet nothings and groom each other and nest, and they hide their nests in crevices. This is in Duluth along the lake walk on a rocky thing. And this is in a city. This is a squab. That's what you call a baby pigeon, and they're very innocent, and they look a lot like dodos, and and that's probably because dodos were in the same order as pigeons. But they keep their, they may have sex right out on the street in front of the deli in downtown New York, in Manhattan, but they keep their private lives private. And so a lot of people don't even believe there are such things as baby pigeons because they keep them pretty secret. And that works. Herring gulls fall in love permanently in this big crowd. They nest in a big crowd a lot of times, in a big colony, and with invisible walls. It's like this huge condo, but there's invisible walls, and the birds know where the walls are. And they each raise their babies, and they're extremely devoted to them. They may stay together year round, the pair, but they do return to each other. And studies of banded birds have proven how devoted they are. And they just really take care of these adorable little babies until they look a little less adorable. And there's a lot of them, but it works. Um, Common loons are only romantic in fresh water. And they stay, and that's when their eyes turn red during the winter when they're out on the ocean. Either on the Our loons are either on the Atlantic Ocean, or most of them are in the Gulf of Mexico. And uh, their eyes get duller during winter, but when they come back, they return to their lake. They aren't so much in love with each other as they are with their lake. And so they will fight, the male will fight off other males, the female will fight off other females, and they know every inch of their lake, the best places to hide out and find food. So they win the battles when another loon tries to take over their lake. And so they end up with each other. And there's but even though there could be that changing of mates, if a different loon won the battle, which hardly ever happens, once the loons are paired, they do not have hanky panky. I don't know that they've ever found more than one or two at the most broods that had different fathers for the same two eggs. They're very, very cool. And loons in Wisconsin and Minnesota seem to have the greatest success now when they nest on these artificial platforms. Those can be on ropes or chains that rise and fall with the changing water level. And they make them with these stick things on the four corners, which are close enough to, which are just the right distance. So neither eagles nor herring gulls feel like they can get onto that nest without colliding with those sticks with their wings. So they're protected from eagles and herring gulls. And they're also protected from changes in water level if things get inundated along the shore. So it's been kind of interesting watching that. It's really important that people don't get competitive and put two loon nest platforms on the same lake if the loons can see each other, because neither pair, if they both attract a pair of loons, neither one is going to succeed in raising young because they're going to waste too much time competing. But the whole point is to raise little baby loons that are so adorable. And I've heard of several people now who, when they've been out on their pontoon boat, loons have brought the babies over to the boat, left, gone fishing, come back to feed the babies, and leave again with the babies by the pontoon boat. And there's a real good reason for that. If they leave them anywhere else while they drop down to get some fish, bald eagles can drop down and get their babies. So it's really interesting that they figured out that that now the adult loons, like adult hummingbirds, leave as soon as the babies can fend for themselves. They are just going to be eating fish out of that lake, which is food that the babies could be using. So the adults head out as soon as the babies can fish by themselves. The babies cannot fly yet until they have all their flight feathers, the full length, so it can support their heavy bodies. So the baby loons have their best chance without their parents, and they know how to migrate. And it works. Bald eagles are passionately in love with their nest, not each other. They both return to the same nest. They get all romantic, and the whole their preferred trees are white pines. They don't want it at the very pinnacle the way osprey do. They want it where the babies will get some shade and protection from the weather. And the whole point is to raise adorable baby eagles who look at us, give us the stink eye when we try to take their picture. And I always throw this picture in because I used to teach junior high school, and this is the only picture I have of a bald eagle pooping. So junior high is where this picture belongs, but it works. Screech owls are really weird. Nobody knows how, but pairs of screech owls are virtually always the same age. Now, it makes sense when you're a 1-year-old screech owl and you find a mate that the main pool of them are going to be 1-year-old screech owls. So they end up together. But when they've lived 3 or 4 years together and one of them dies, how does the other one manage to find a 4-year-old screech owl or a 5-year-old screech owl? They probably age each other the same way that people, bird banders, age them using UV lights to see the pattern of molt. They probably know that too. Their eyes can detect that, or their feathers wouldn't be showing it off. So that probably has to do with it, but it's very interesting. That's my personal eastern screech owl that I had for 18 years, Archimedes, but he died a few years ago. Screech owls come in 2 colors. They don't seem prejudiced, or they don't seem to favor one color over the other when they're selecting each other. The ones with gray feathers, the feathers tend to be a little denser and provide a little better insulation. And the red ones are much more common in the south, and gray as you get further north. And it probably there are some people predicting with climate change we're going to see more and more red ones in Minnesota as we have milder weather because they don't have as good insulation. But I don't know what the advantage is to the looser feathers, but they raise their babies. They stay devoted. Being owls, they stay on the same territory, and it's really cool. And great horned owls are the Valentine birds. They start mating around the time it's Valentine's Day. I set out my trail cam on this feeder to catch feeder birds, and I checked it one day and I found this great horned owl had landed on my feeder and was just checking out the neighborhood around my yard from the feeder. So that was my biggest reward from having a trail cam was getting this little video. But but the males and females hoot. He's smaller but has a deeper voice, and that's because the resonant part of his skull is bigger and his syrinx is bigger. So that gives him the deeper voice. So you can tell when you have a pair, because you'll hear a whoo, 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 and you can tell which is the male and which is the female. But they're so romantic, and they raise their babies, and they stay in vocal contact through the winter, even though they don't stay together. There's a female in her nest in Ithaca, New York. And the whole point is to raise baby screech owls, and it works. When I worked at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology, it was right when they were doing a lot of genetic studies and finding out that bluebirds and wrens and chickadees and all these birds, there was multiple paternity in some of the nests would have more than one dad. And John Fitzpatrick, the director of the lab, had done his PhD research on Florida scrub jays. And he said nobody's going to find any of that going on with Florida scrub jays. And Irby Levette, who was in charge of the genetic stuff, was saying, John, we're finding it in every bird we've examined. It's going to happen in scrub jays. And John said, no way. And he bet him. And nobody will divulge how much they bet on this, but they bet. And they have scrub jay records, genetic data going back many decades since John was doing his research, because they have the specimens that are color banded, so they know who the mates were, who the offspring were. And they examined so many scrub jays. And do you know how many times they found multiple paternity in Florida scrub jays? 0. If you want to send a wedding card to someone that you really want to stick together, put Florida scrub jays on it. It works. American crows are so devoted to their mates, and when the first real sign of spring is when they're carrying sticks. They've had babies in the nest now begging for at least 10 days, probably since the beginning of May here in Duluth. They raise their babies, and in Ithaca, all the crows are color marked by Kevin McGowan, who goes up and bans the nestlings before they'll jump out in a panic. And he has done so much research on the crows in Ithaca. Let me show you some of his crows. He puts these plastic patches on their wings, as well as color bands. The paint and the background color, he uses one each year. So he could just look at a crow without even looking at what the letters say. He knows what year he banded them, what year they hatched. And he keeps track of all the relationships of all the crows in the whole Ithaca area. When people have crows, they call Kevin, and he knows how devoted they are. Once in a while, there's divorce, but overall, these are the very proper birds. I compare to Nick and Nora Charles, who are so in love, but they're kind of quiet about it in front of other people. You can see how devoted they are, but they're not all lovey-dovey and in a very overt way. I have to throw this picture in because this was one crow family that raised their babies next door. And this is the 2 parents, and they brought off all 4 fledglings. And this was at my feeder last fall, so I had to throw it in. But that's a system that works. So that's all the pictures I have for you. This is my dog, Pip. I hope you all stay safe and well. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. And are there any questions? You can turn your own mute off, I think, if you have a question.
Thanks for all the wonderful stories and great pictures. Really fun.
Yeah, I wish I'd taken some of those pictures, but I'm proud of the ones I have taken. The Into the Nest book, I didn't do any woodpeckers in my book, The Love Lives, but the woodpecker nests, some of them were taken by Stan Tequila, and I don't know how he got them because, you know, the hole is up here and the cavity is like this inside the tree with the babies down here. But he shows, like, I think it was Downy or hairy woodpecker, the whole thing while they're getting bigger and bigger. And I have no idea how he got those pictures in that nest.
Well, there's that, I've got it somewhere. It's a guide of nests. It's, I think it's a Peters. I mean, in these pictures, you think about, I mean, I saw where those crows are nesting. It's way up there in kind of a skinny-ish tree, or not crows, the ravens. But there's pictures like that, and it's kind of amazing to think that people can go up there, and I'm sure they wear hard hats.
To get her Baltimore Oriole pictures in her backyard, because Baltimore Orioles nest really high up in Mari Reed constructed this long tower-like thing that looked so precarious to me. You know, if I were to come back as a bird, I like to think I'd be a chickadee, but I'm scared of heights. I probably, you know, would be a dodo or a ostrich or somebody.
So Laura, I just want to thank you very much for your presentation tonight. It was terrific. I have a question about barred owls.
Yeah.
So we have had a pair nesting in our neighborhood for the last several years, and the young will stay around till about maybe mid-June or so. They like to hang out in couple large hackberry trees near our house. And tonight there were 3 young ones out in a cottonwood tree, a gigantic cottonwood tree across the street in a park. And so I'm just kind of curious about, you mentioned some other owls, but I'm wondering about barred owls, if they have a certain courtship strategy, and if the young, you know, when they leave the area where they hatch, where they fledge the nest, do they go set up a new territory somewhere, or what kind of
Yeah,
thing?
it's tricky. The baby owls, well, the adults, barred owls do, I think, I'm not going to guarantee it, but I think they pretty much settle for the same pair year after year. I cannot mimic the female barred owl. She has more vibrato in her voice than the male has.
Mhm.
That's how you tell those two apart. The parents stay with the young, or the young stay with the parents through the summer. They're very dependent at first, but even as they're starting to hunt all by themselves, they like the security of their parents, especially because it's like a kid getting a job at McDonald's and they obviously aren't self-supporting yet. You know, they're starting to make an income, but can't live on it yet. And the babies stay with their parents, and their parents stay very devoted. And then as fall comes around, the babies are getting restless, but the parents are also at this point where they're done. They don't want to be sharing food anymore because they have to put on fat for the winter. And so they get a little bit nudging the babies off. I didn't talk about that with the Florida scrub jays. The young males stay with their parents for a year, sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 years, until they can find their own territory. And the parents just can't get rid of them. And the babies help the parents with Florida scrub jays, but the parents never get a moment to themselves. The owls, even on their winter territory, the male and female may occasionally call to each other, but they want their own territory because they're hunting and they're big enough that it's tricky to get enough food. And so that's when that's when mortality is highest for young owls, other than the precariousness when they're first fledging. is when they are trying to be independent. And other barn owls are driving them off their territory and just trying to find a little piece of land that nobody's trying to drive them off of is the trick. That's why most years when we get snowy owls, they tend to be young ones. There are some adults that come down to Wisconsin every winter. They've had repeats with snowy owls. Now that we're doing Project Snowstorm, we're learning about that. But one of the main things that when we have an eruption year where there was a whole lot of production, the adults have their territories for the winter. And when they keep chasing the babies off, there were so many babies, they got to go somewhere. So they come down to Wisconsin and Minnesota.
Mhm. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
That was a good question. I don't have a question, but I really enjoyed the presentation.
Oh, thanks.
Want to get both of those books.
Mhm.
Well, Laura, thank you very much. Does anybody else have questions for Laura?
I just have a question about, you were recording it, so is it going to be available to re-look at it again somewhere?
Yes, I will get it uploaded to YouTube, and then do you follow us on our Facebook pages, one or the other?
Mhm.
Okay,
Yep.
and then I will share it on there once I get it posted.
Yeah, but I'd like to look at it again to catch some of the information.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think with as great of a presentation as that is, I have a feeling you're not going to be the only one that's going to be watching this one again, because that was great.
Thanks.
Mhm.
All right.
Laura, I have one other quick question, if nobody else is jumping in, about common loons.
Mhm.
You're talking about the young. I've always heard that sometimes if young are hatched too late in the season, they may not get their flight feathers in time to migrate off a northern lake. And I'm wondering
That
if
does happen.
that does happen sometimes.
Yeah, part of it is that even when they do get their flight feathers in, it's tricky to get out of the water. They have to run on the water with as little of their body being held in by the water surface tension, and they have to be running into a wind in order to get the lift.
Mhm.
And so if we start getting some really cold nights without the right direction of wind for the shape of the lake, they could actually get frozen into the water. So every year, people like Marge Gibson up in Antioch and or Antigo and the Raptor Center and other rehabbers get calls to help a loon that's stuck in the water. Sometimes the problem isn't so much the weather as that the loon has lead poisoning or has there's been mercury problems, and they're doing some long-term studies now because many of our loons that breed up here winter in the Gulf, and the BP oil spill was way worse than people have acknowledged, and they're trying to find out what the long-term effects of all that toxic water on birds that spent the winter there.
Mhm.
I went down there during the oil spill, and when I was there in August, all the birds that at the one rehab center that was holding a thing for the press, um, all the birds that they had were northern gannets, and they were all first year northern gannets that hatched the previous year. And somebody asked the official US Fish and Wildlife Service guy why they were all young birds instead of mature ones. And he said that as far as they could figure out, The older birds had figured out how to avoid oil plumes when they're plunging into the water from the heights. No, we're in the Gulf of Mexico in August when the only gannets in the Gulf of Mexico were young birds because the rest were up on their breeding range on the Atlantic coast. And it was horrifying that they didn't let the people who actually knew what was happening work on these projects. He was a great, knowledgeable guy, but he'd done his research and his career work on deer. So nowhere near the water, nowhere near northern gannets. And meanwhile, Marge Gibson wanted to go down and help. She had a lot of experience because she'd been in California with retrieving oiled birds. They would not let her or any experienced rehabbers down there. They threatened to take away their licenses. But meanwhile, my husband works at the EPA and they were getting emails asking if they wanted to help retrieving birds. And it was horrifying, but the only birds they were officially counting during that whole time were birds that had been retrieved, and they were not allowed to retrieve birds if they could fly at all. So it was a mess,
Wow.
but our loons are still suffering from it.
Mhm. Yeah, amazing.
On that happy note,
Right.
my chicken is doing well.
That is good. That is good. At least I'm glad you spun that back around into something positive to bring the mood back up here. So yeah. Again, thank you very much, Laura. And last chance for anybody with questions. Otherwise, Laura, if you want to share how people can learn more about your books or get in touch with you, feel free to provide that
My
information.
webpage has everything. My daughter did the database for it. So if you go to lauraerickson.com, if you look up a species, it has links to Cornell and Wikipedia and the Minnesota Breeding Bird Atlas. If that has an entry for that species, it will link to any radio program podcasts I've done about that species. If I've made recordings of that species, like now, if you look up wood thrush, there will be a recording. I made it yesterday. So it's got all that kind of stuff. And it was really fun that I don't have to do much work and it automatically magically goes up there because my daughter is brilliant.
That is awesome. Thank you very much, Laura. And
Dan,
We would-
I love your dog.
yeah,
We
she's been-
used to have a golden.
oh,
He's
she's
he's upset because it's past his walk time and he's trying to tell me, he's trying to send a message here.
Yeah, he wants you to go out and see an owl.
He wants to do something.
I've got a golden retriever whining at my door too over there. He's like, it's time for you to end your meeting so you can go come and play
Okay.
with me.
Thank you very much. This is wonderful.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Thanks for inviting me, Gwen.
Yeah,
Yes, thank you so much. Wonderful
Thanks.
presentation.
Thanks for hosting this meeting. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
so
Yeah, Jonathan was great.
Oh, I didn't do anything. You're the talent here. You were doing everything. I just kind of sat back and petted my dog. It was great. Yeah. So, well, cool. Well, again, thank you very much, Laura. I'll take back the host and wish everyone a very good night and hope to see you all in person at Myrick Park next month. That will be very good. So, all right, everybody, have a good night.
good night.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.